I'm going to be comparing the Lord of the Rings franchise to the Transformers franchise. As of right now, I haven't seen Transformers 1, but I've seen all the other Transformers movies except the 1986 animated movie. I didn't watch the original TV show when it came out. I was born in 1999. I haven't seen The Last Knight, though I have seen Age of Extinction, but admittedly I haven't rewatched it anytime recently, just like how I've seen Revenge of the Fallen before, but I haven't rewatched it anytime recently. The other movies are ones that I've seen or rewatched recently enough that I remember. When it comes to The Lord of the Rings, I've seen the Peter Jackson trilogy as well as the Hobbit trilogy. I have not seen the 1978 animated movie or this movie called Return of the King, which is separate from the Peter Jackson movie Return of the King. When it comes to the highest score for each franchise, in the case of Transformers, the movie Bumblebee has the highest score of 90%. In the case of Lord of the Rings, the conclusion to the middle film in the Peter Jackson trilogy, Two Towers, has the highest score of 95%. Lord of the Rings wins here. Then when you look at lowest score, the lowest score for Lord of the Rings is actually 49% for the 1978 animated movie. In the case of Transformers, the fifth Michael Bay movie, The Last Knight, has the lowest score of only 16%, so Lord of the Rings wins again. Then when you look at average score, Transformers has an average of 48, while Lord of the Rings has an average of 74. Then when you look at gap between lowest and highest score, in the case of Transformers, you got a gap of 74, whereas of Lord of the Rings, you have a gap of 45. So Lord of the Rings wins here, meaning it's won every round so far. And actually, in this case, I would agree and say that I prefer the Lord of the Rings franchise because while there are Transformers movies that I've enjoyed, that franchise has not come anywhere close to putting out a trilogy as good as the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I think is just one of the best trilogies ever made because the story is engaging and compelling, the acting is great, the score is really memorable, action is thrilling, there's great world building in there, emotional moments that hit really hard. Return of the King did a great job of paying everything off. Are there a few too many endings? Maybe, but I don't really care to be honest because the endings are so good. They all make sense. It all feels satisfying. Yeah, this is absolutely the right way to wrap things up. Now, I think the Hobbit trilogy is not anywhere near as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy because I think it was fundamentally flawed from the start because the filmmakers were trying to take a small book. I'm talking about the Hobbit books here. I think there are multiple of them, but whether there's just one Hobbit book or multiple, either way, they are short, simple stories. They're not intended to be a Lord of the Rings style epic. But with the Hobbit trilogy, you can just feel the filmmakers trying to take a small amount of source material and stretch it out into 3 movies. Trying to take this story that's supposed to be simple, lighthearted adventure in the world of Middle Earth and turn it into a Lord of the Rings epic, which is not what The Hobbit was ever intended to be. So you can just feel them padding everything out, stretching everything out way too much. Now, admittedly, the Rotten Tomatoes scores aren't actually that bad at all. The first 2 Hobbit movies are fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Even the third one is almost fresh with a 59%. Sure, there are good moments in the movies, but I think that it was a big miscalculation on the filmmakers' part to try to stretch things out to the degree that they did. Now, I think that the journey for some of our characters in the main Lord of the Rings trilogy is really powerful. I like the journey that Aragorn is on. For example, stepping up to the plate, accepting his destiny, and actually becoming the king. I also like Gandalf is one of the classic wise mentor characters. His transformation from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White is really satisfying. I like the beginning of the Two Towers Also, I like that with the hobbits, you have Merry and Pippin, for example, who start off as more goofy, but by the time of the third movie, both of them actually fight bravely and valiantly in the defense of Middle Earth during the Battle of the Black Gate. In fact, we see actually that both of them help to convince the Ents to attack Saruman in Isengard during Two Towers. That proves to be important. Plus, actually, Merry played a part in the defeat of the Witch King. So, even Merry and Pippin show their competence by the time you get to the third movie. I like how Sam is almost all the time presented as the loyal, faithful best friend that isn't going to give up on Frodo no matter what. You see this especially in Fellowship of the Ring, where he makes it very clear, I'm willing to die for you, Frodo. Admittedly, I think it was a mistake in Return of the King to have Sam actually leave Frodo. To me, that feels out of character. I think it would have made way more sense for Sam to be like, you know what, screw it. I do not care what Frodo has to say. I'm not going to leave him. I'm going to stick by his side no matter what. Plus, Sam knew at that point that Gollum was manipulating Frodo, and certainly he could tell that Frodo was growing more and more exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally because of the toll that carrying that ring took on him. So it doesn't make sense to me that Sam actually leaves. Sure, it's satisfying when Sam comes back to save Frodo, of course, but I think things could have been a bit better in that regard. But I like that Frodo is the one who actually accepts the duty of carrying the ring. Even though he states during the movies, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish I could just stay in the Shire or have parties with my friends, eat a bunch of food. We see that hobbits are, at their core, simple, humble, modest creatures that actually don't really care too much about what's happening in Middle Earth most of the time. They like staying in the Shire and just having fun. But we also see that when they need to step up to the plate, they do that. You see that with Frodo. At first, yes, he is telling Gandalf, hey, we should hide the ring, let's not speak of it, then it'll be totally fine. But when you get to the scene where the council has been assembled at Rivendell, you notice that everyone else besides Frodo is starting to be influenced by the ring. They're all starting to fight amongst themselves. And actually, I like the filmmaking here where the sound gets echoey and we focus in on the ring. It's a good visual way of communicating what's going on. And Frodo says, I will take the ring. And the reactions from the other characters like Gandalf and Aragorn are so powerful. And then we see in the movies that even though this was a heavy burden that Frodo carried because of how powerful the ring was, Frodo resisted the corruptive influence of the ring longer than anyone else, and he keeps going despite how tired he is, clearly, by Return of the King. And I like that when you get to the part where Frodo and Sam are climbing up the slopes of Mount Doom, Frodo does actually collapse, yes, because at that point it's so hard for him to carry on, especially because Sauron is focusing in on him. Sam actually carries Frodo into Mount Doom, so Sam played an important part in the destruction of the ring. There's no doubt about that. And yes, when they're inside Mount Doom, okay, we see that Frodo does give in to the temptation, but to me, I've always thought that that was simply because Frodo's really strong will had been spent by that point. It's pretty clear that Frodo was able to resist longer than anyone else because we see that he is just so good at his core, where he has no desire for power, he has no desire for control over others, and thus he is able to not give in to the ring for a long time. And so I've always thought that Frodo is the real paragon of these movies. He's the simple, humble hobbit who is not like a fighter. He's not, part of the military or anything like that. But when there's something he needs to do, he does it, despite how hard it is. He made a big sacrifice. Sam is, of course, great as well. There's no doubt about that. He's a hero too. But I think that's really powerful. We see from Frodo. I like that when you get to the end of Return of the King, Frodo clearly has decided, I'm not going to stay in Middle Earth anymore because I've never been able to forget what I went through. And even years later, it still hurts. If I leave Middle Earth, I will be able to find peace and healing that I would never be able to find if I stay here. And so we have Frodo saying goodbye to all his friends, and so powerful, especially when Frodo's just about to get on the ship. He turns to the camera and smiles. That hits so hard that Frodo actually is happy again after everything he went through, after the heavy burden that he carried. Frodo's closer now to the way he was at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. He's more like how he was when we first saw him, where he was more innocent, where he didn't have to carry a heavy weight on his shoulders. And the ending of Return of the King in general does such a good job of just paying everything off. I mean, that moment where everyone bows to the hobbits, everyone bows to Merry, Pippin, Frodo, and Sam, Aragorn, and all the others, that hits so hard. The music is fantastic. It's powerful because the hobbits are not royalty or anything like that, but by the end of this trilogy, everyone knows hobbits are heroes. Now, when I look at the Transformers franchise, I think that the 2007 movie from Michael Bay, it works as a dumb but fun popcorn movie. It's certainly not great. I think that Michael Bayisms are still there, but they're not as obnoxious as in the other films. I can feel in this case that Steven Spielberg, as the executive producer, was putting Michael Bay on a leash, reining him in, and thus it made the movie better. There are certainly moments of humor that I think work well. The action is not too noisy yet. There's definitely some good music in here, especially when the Autobots arrive to Earth. I think Dark of the Moon has great spectacle in it. Certainly has issues. It spends way too much time on Sam trying to find a job. That's not what I want from a Transformers film. The Michael Bayisms are certainly there, especially at the beginning. You see very clearly that objectification of women that's in Michael Bay's movies. You get to Age of Extinction last night. Ooh, wow, things went really off the rails. Age of Extinction is just a hard movie to get through. It really is, because it's so long, it's so overly complicated. The Michael Bayisms got so obnoxious by this point, especially when it feels like Michael Bay was invested more in trying to justify why it's fine for the 17-year-old girl to date a guy who's in his 20s rather than the plot of the movie. Michael Bay dedicated 10 minutes of screen time to explaining to us why this relationship is not legally statutory rape. You combine that with the fact that Michael Bay had the camera leering over the butt of an underage girl, you go, oh, Michael Bay, it seems like you're a creep and a pervert. In fact, a borderline pedophile. And then Bumblebee, I think, is a dramatic improvement. Revenge of the Fallen is an absolute mess. The story here is so many problems. There's not enough action. Michael Bayisms are really obnoxious here. Mudflap and Skids, yikes, they're some of the most horribly racist characters that have ever been put in a movie. But Bumblebee is super refreshing because it's a short movie that's not overly long, it's not overly complicated, it actually has a main character that you really care about, it goes on a journey that works really well. You also refreshingly have a main female character that never at any point dresses in an overly revealing manner. Sure, you have the side character who is closer to what you'd see in a Michael Bay movie. But the big difference is that the side character Bumblebee, the bully Tina, is supposed to be unlikable. You're not meant to like her at all. You're meant to go, yeah, she's absolutely a spoiled mall brat. And then I think Rise of the Beast, perfectly fine, solid, middle of the road Transformers film. It has a story you can follow, characters that are good enough. Mirage is definitely a standout character. I like the journey the Optimus Prime is on. There's good visuals in here, but at the same time, when you get to the third act and you're like, oh, the final battle's in the middle of nowhere. It's not very engaging. And by this point, you definitely got a feeling of, oh, I've seen this before, especially because you've Earth in Danger again, Unicron, Skybeam type thing happening in the third act. It just feels familiar. Like, oh, okay, yeah, we're doing this again. So, not any big mistakes, but not fantastic either. That'll wrap things up for this video. I definitely prefer Lord of the Rings. I'm looking forward to seeing Transformers 1, that is for sure. Bye, everyone.